So in terms of a critical, when you use the word critical shortage in Asia, there are two parts of this, right? One is Asia specific, and the other one is a general. Is there a leadership shortage? I've been blessed to be able to work with executives throughout the world. So I've taught executives in Europe, in America, in the Middle East, and in India. And there's no part of the world where they would say we have enough leaders. So certainly there's a critical shortage of leadership, period. Then the question is there something unique to Asia where there's more or above and beyond what one would expect? Absolutely not. I would not say that. Nothing that I've seen. The first word I put up when I teach class is empathy. And then I always try to talk to students to say empathy is a thinking word. It's not a feeling word, right? And everywhere I've taught, it's the ability to put yourself in someone else's shoes. Correct. And in terms of how will they react, specifically in regards to their experience or their situation versus my experience or how I would react to it. And I know this sounds very simple, but in the classes I have, we trap executives all the time who say, oh, well, they should think this. And the basis of their comment is because this is the way I view the world, right? And then when they hear other executives have a totally different take on it, it's hard for them to register, why would you think differently if this is the way the world works? But it's really then hard for them to reprogram to say, look, your view of the world is only based on your experience. There's a whole world of experience which would have a totally different outcome or a totally different perception of what reality is. One of the slides I always like to show is, as a psychologist, there's this feeling that the foundations of human motives, right? There's two general ones. There's this social interest. We care for those around us, and there's this need for achievement striving. We want to accomplish great things. I have not seen anywhere in the world race-based differences in these two motives. Now, there are cultural influences on these, and maybe some suppression of some one or the other, or an amplification. I think like for Dharma in India, or the sense of obligation to country or family. These influences, or these will have influences on my value system or anyone's value system, right? But the foundation of what humans strive for, I think, is consistent across any country, any situation. Personalities are consistent across any country. The only danger I see when we really focus on cross-cultural research is that we always find significant differences between India, China, the West. That's great. But then when we start taking those differences that we find statistically and then imprinting stereotypes on people, to me that's fundamentally dangerous, because then it says Indians are this or Chinese are that, and that's the way it is. And that's not what I've seen. Right? And the way I think global organizations operate is usually under the assumption that people are much more pliable, malleable to the context in which they operate. And if you change the context, you have to believe that you can change the behaviors. Right? Otherwise, we have to be fatalistic and say, well, these people are this or they're that, and there's no need for OB or HR professors because people are what they are, and that's not what I believe. Well, that's interesting. So it's kind of a turnaround question, right? So the idea is, I say I have to be able to put myself in the shoes of others, and then if I run across someone who strictly believes there's a unique Chinese way of doing things, or an Asian way, or a Western way, then why do they believe the way they do? Obviously, in most cases, it's because, one, they haven't experienced a lot of different ways of viewing things. So that's the difference between MBA and EMBA students. So MBA students tend to have a very narrow conceptualization as compared to EMBA, which more often have a very broad, globalized view of things. So they're much more apt to say, you know what, this is the way we do things here, but that's not the only way. Whereas MBA students might say, this is the way they did it in my company, and that's their reality. So some people call that wisdom. Some people, call that just basic experience, but that's one way I can attribute a very closed view of let's say, race and management, right? But the other view I have to give is that, look, they may have come across a set of experiences, usually successes that say this works, okay? But then we just know as a scholar, because I have to not study one company or one person, I have to study hundreds if not thousands. Across a large sample, I personally know that what works for you doesn't always work in other contexts. So then I have to step back and say, you know, in that person's world, that's the way they view things, and my response to people in my class is it's your company, right? It's your responsibility, these are your decisions. But 99% of the time, people really understand that these types of statements are overstatements, right? I mean, for example, we always have this discussion of Jack Welch. Do you use normalized distribution or, you know, an up and out mentality? And most executives will say, it doesn't work for me, or they'll say, I love it, it works for me, but they will not imprint that view universally, right? It is just what they do. The idea of misalignment of rewards isn't new, right? This is something Stephen Kerr would say, rewarding A while hoping for B. And when I speak about that particular misalignment of under-rewarding dutiful behaviors, over-rewarding achievement striving, executives get it. And they have an intuitive sense of when it's gone overboard, right? So there are I guess there's two levels of this. One, it's the way the world works. So I always advise my students, if you're dutiful, you had better behave more like an achievement striver, or you will not get promoted. So that's the first level. The second level is, well, if I'm going to develop a successful organization, I always hear successful organizations say that we promote both somehow, right? Either through promotion or volitionally trying to find ways to reward, or maybe just acknowledge the importance of duty, either through socialization, right, or through specific reward. But you know, at the end of the day, successful teams will have both. And viable organizations understand the importance of dutiful, right? You'll call it loyalty, you'll call it many things. It's not always called duty, but it's there. It's part of what successful organizations do.